Now, members of the Russian military have arrived in Niger to support the country's ruling junta after it cut ties with Western allies. A spokesperson for Niger's military government says the Russians are there to train soldiers as they battle an insurgency. The Russian Defence Ministry says the members of its Africa Corps are the first group to go to Niger. Footage of the Russian instructors unloading a cargo plane full of equipment was broadcast on state television.
We're here to train Niger's army using the military equipment that has arrived here. It's equipment for different military specialties, for promoting military specialties. We are here to develop military cooperation between Russia and Niger.
I'm joined now by the security analyst and retired US Army Captain Bish Johnson. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. I just want to start with the obvious, I think. This isn't the regular Russian army that's in Niger. It's their Africa Corps, which is effectively the Wagner Group rebranded after their little mutiny, I think we could call it. They've got an atrocious record in Africa, including carrying out civilian massacres. Why is Niger cozying up to them?
You know, power abhors vacuum. In a situation where you've seen declining Western presence in Africa, the natural thing for some of these administrations would be to look for avenue to close the vacuum. And so that's what you see happening in Niger and some of these other French-speaking African countries. It's because of the declining presence of Western presence in some of these countries.
And the Russians also took a state-of-the-art defence system, air defence system, with them to Niger. Now, they're supposed to be there training troops to combat a militant insurgency. The militants categorically do not have any planes, so the air defence system that the Russians have brought, that's not what this is for. There's some suggestion that this system is a deterrent for any action from ECOWAS countries. What's your take on that?
Well, it's possible. You know, until we know the details of what the military agreement that the Nigerians signed with the Russians, we won't know exactly. And one thing with military is that they can't give you all the information. You know, they will give you certain information based on the need to know. But I know that the actual nitty-gritty of whatever is the defense military agreement that they've signed with the Nigerians is not going to be made public. And so it's possible that the air defense system that you're talking about is part of the nitty-gritty of the military defense package that they have signed with the Nigerians. It could be used, you know, it could be to deter ECOWAS countries from intervening militarily in Niger. It could also be for some other uses.
Sure, I mean, not clear what it is, but, you know, as we said, it's on the face of it, they're there to do training. And it's not to defend against the militant insurgency. But we've also heard from some people in Niger, some residents there, who accuse the ruling junta of being willing to let the country go up in flames just to cling on to power. Sure, they say, turn away from the West, turn away from the former colonial power of France, but not at the expense of constitutional order. Bringing in Wagner, bringing in the Africa Corps, if that's what we want to call them, that ensures that the military rulers keep a grip on power. But at what cost is this to the people in Niger?
Personally, I can't tell you of what cost that would be to the people of Niger for now. Like I said earlier, power abhors vacuum. In a situation where there is a declining military presence of the West, or even the presence of the West generally, the tendency is for their competitors to try to fill that vacuum, whether it's Russia or China. That is why it is very, very imperative. If you go back, say for example, the United States, throughout the administration of Donald Trump, there was that tendency to pull back from global activities across the globe. And where that's the situation, your competitors will try to fill that vacuum, Sure, a lot of us, we don't want military juntas, but you know that in Africa, the kind of democracy that we have here in Africa is not the type of democracy that is obtainable in the Western world. if we don't want these military folks, the military juntas, to be taking over power, we have to actually look at democracy from the actual perspective of democracy, such as the democracy that you practice in the Western countries. Democracy where the people will have a say in their government. The type of democracy that you see in most countries in Africa is not that type of democracy. It's the democracy that the judiciary is not independent, the legislatures are not independent, and the people do not have a say in determining how they are governed. Most of the elections that you see in Africa goes to the highest bidder. And that is why you see that this kind of revolt that you're seeing in some of all these countries in Africa. So we have to go back to the drawing table and decide whether we want to practice the real democracy. That is the actual government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Until we see that kind of democracy in all African countries, there's always going to be this tendency for military to strike and take over power.
And it's not just Russia that we're seeing getting involved when we see these coups happening. There's also an increasing influence from China on the on the African continent, including here in Nigeria, it has to be said. Where do you see the future of this involvement? You know, countries turning away from the West, turning towards Russia, turning towards China. Where do you see this all going?
Well, see, to be frank with you, Africa as a continent is facing multifaceted challenges, and the solutions to these challenges do not lie in one block. The solutions to some of the challenges that are faced by various African countries lie in multiple regions and multiple blocks. And African leaders have figured out that it is in their best interest to remain strategically neutral in terms of who they cooperate with, so that it gives them the leverage to be able to approach any one of these geopolitical powers and be able to attend to the problems of the over 1 billion African citizens. So that's what is going on in the world right now. Africa is the new bride. Everybody wants to get involved. And so to the extent that the West is pulling back, then there will be the tendency for either it's China or Russia to try to fill in the gap where the West has pulled back from.
Fantastic, very, lots of insights there, and I think lots of questions still to be asked about this. But for the moment, Bish Johnson, thank you so much, security analyst and former US Army captain, for being on the show with us.
Thank you very much for having me.